Well, I think we're ready to go. First, I just want to thank all of you for getting up early to come and be part of this very early morning session. It is the beginning of the last day of SOCAP, and I think all of us are probably swirling with the ideas and the great connections that we've made. So we want to keep it going. I think we have a chance to have a really exciting and maybe kind of intimate conversation. Since we have a smaller group, I really want to make this interactive because we can, and I think each of you have reasons to be here that, that make it really important that we do that. So I'm Yasmina Zaidman. I'm with Acumen. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a second. But I wanted to just get a sense, because the topic for today is kind of playing with two big ideas. One is this idea of sort of the real meaning of social capital. How do you create a society where people have opportunities to contribute? And so we're talking about workforce development, partnerships that can create employment opportunities and ways to engage people. And I think what we're seeing right now is that without that sense of opportunity to contribute, to be a part of society, the social fabric does start to break down a little bit. And we're seeing that right now. The social erosion, as they called it on the cover of the Wall Street Journal today, is creating a tremendous sense of unease and is also helping to drive a lot of the political divisions that we're seeing. So that's one thing we're going to talk about, is where are we seeing really exciting opportunities and entrepreneurial solutions that can help strengthen that social fabric by creating opportunity for all. And then the other big theme is collaboration. In the work that we're doing on the stage, all of us are actually working together. And we've done that because we feel like we just can't do it alone, and we're learning how to partner in really exciting catalytic ways. So I'm curious, for the people in the room, if you have to sort of vote on one or the other, are you more focused on workforce development, by a show of hands, something that you're focused on and excited about, or more focused on collaboration as a theme? Okay. So we'll make sure that we kind of emphasize the collaboration theme with workforce development as sort of the backdrop. And the other thing I wanted to ask of all of you is how much of a personal experience you have with this issue of inclusion. So how many people in the room have had the opportunity to work for minimum wage? Great. So a lot of us have the experience of being employed, but not necessarily gainfully employed. And I think that's an important issue as we think about how to create opportunities for people to not only work, but to have their work give them the stability and opportunity they need. And how many people in the room, this is more personal, have found themselves unemployed for longer than they wanted to be? So you understand the anxiety, the stress that comes from that, and it's something that I think is sort of personal for all of us, that it does tear at the fabric of someone's life and of the community. So I want to start to introduce our panelists and then get into some questions. Mark is an old friend and someone that we've worked with for several years, but we're excited to be launching this new partnership. Mark is the prototype of the Entrepreneurial, and he is creating change in a very, very respected, storied, 300-year-old institution.
326-year-old institution.
Yes, well, your branding people are going to come after me, I'm sure. But is not only being an entrepreneur, but is actually helping to cultivate and develop entrepreneurship within Barclays. He launched their Social Innovation Fund, which is a £25 million initiative to foster social innovation inside of Barclays, and it's quite revolutionary. And now he's also working on the citizenship team and extending that entrepreneurial spirit well beyond Barclays. Eamon, who's with Acumen and who I've known since he started working with Acumen in Africa, and he is now co-leading our Acumen America program. And Daniel, who I've met more recently but have admired from afar for many years, who has been an entrepreneur and an advocate for entrepreneurs since he was in college, and has helped us find a lot of great ways to support the next generation of leaders in our community. So with all of that, we'll get started, and we'll try to do this part of the conversation quickly so we can get to this part of the conversation. I want to start with you, Mark. If you could tell us just a little bit about how Barclays is thinking about this issue of economic opportunity, workforce development, and what you guys are looking for in your partnerships.
Yeah, thank you, and morning, everyone. It really is a privilege to be here and share a stage with Acumen and Unreasonable, both very good friends of Barclays. It's actually my first year at SOCAP, and I was just saying before we came on, it's amazing energy, and it really is a little overwhelming almost to the energy and the opportunity to connect with such an amazing group of people. So we're here to learn, and it's a great platform to do that. So as it relates to workforce development and employability, so we look at this challenge of unemployment and employability globally, wherever we have a business. And we really start to think about it from a sense of both the supply side of that equation and the demand side. From the supply side of, if you think about getting a job, you need the right skills to get a job, the right opportunities to get a job. And then on the demand side from the employers, you actually have to have the vacancies there. You need to have jobs to go into. And in between those two things, the pathways to connect the two. And entrepreneurship plays a role on both sides of that equation. And we work with both of you guys on both sides of that equation. On the demand side, most obviously from an entrepreneurship perspective, entrepreneurs are growing, they're scaling businesses, and they're creating jobs. So very obviously we want to find those entrepreneurs that are scaling up, that have the opportunity to create jobs. And we recognize that I think all net new job creation is coming from small, fast-growing businesses, not from large corporations. Yeah. So our hope is that we can, through partnership, find the best, the most world-class portfolio of scale-up entrepreneurs, and through a model of partnership with Unreasonable and Acumen, wrap them with support to scale them and create jobs. On the supply side, the skills training side and the pathways into employment is maybe not quite as obvious, the role entrepreneurship plays there, but we start to think about interventions in providing people with skills to get into work. If you do that through a traditional non-profit route, a charity route, we have some amazing partnerships. And those interventions are fantastic and they have real impact, but they're only going to be able to have impact to the extent you can continue to fund those partnerships and continue to provide the grants. If you find a way of tackling those same challenges through entrepreneurship, through the models that we're looking at with Acumen America, then those solutions by nature become sustainable, scalable, and we're looking at finding those most innovative solutions in the workforce development sector that we can then hopefully, with Acumen and our business, look at ways of helping to scale those solutions.
That's great. So I think it's another big theme of the day, not only the power of collaboration, but the power of entrepreneurship to hone in on solutions in this particular sector that can be really effective. So I'm going to turn to Eamon, because he's sort of our Wikipedia. He knows things, and particularly in this new portfolio that Acumen has launched, focusing on the United States, we've had to learn a lot about these issues. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about why Acumen is in America now, and why this issue rose to the top as one that we wanted to focus on.
Great. Thanks, Yasmina, and thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to Barclays for a tremendous partnership. There are 43 million Americans that live in poverty, 1 out of 7, and there are 48 million that are food insecure, 68 million that are underbanked. These are numbers that are probably not surprising to many of you here, many at this conference. And we've been investing internationally for the last 15 years, and one of the things that we've learned is that the condition of poverty is a function of systems of poverty. And in order to really move the needle, we need to change the way that those systems work. In the US, there are similar systems of poverty very much at work here. And we believe that entrepreneurs break those systems. And investing in entrepreneurs sow the seeds of disruption against systems of poverty, much as they do of old antiquated business models and in the traditional commercial space. And so with that learning from our work overseas and recognizing that similar systems of poverty are in play here in this country, we've launched Acumen America to invest in companies at the seed and Series A stage that are tackling tough systemic issues in health and workforce development and in financial inclusion, and in entrepreneurs that are going to address the systems change that's really necessary. And workforce has been something that is a system that we're particularly passionate about. There are 8 million unemployed, another 8 million that are either marginally employed or working part-time against their will, 10 million more who are not using their skills in their employment. And this is a big problem. There are problems in training, there are problems in finding these folks jobs, there's problems in how these folks are hired by employers, and systems that work at every one of those levels. Only a quarter of people from for-profit education, for-profit higher ed graduate within 6 years. 50% of people with a certificate get a job in their field of study. And only 50% of employers say they struggle to find the talent they need. These are the systemic challenges at work and workforce. And we're tremendously excited by the entrepreneurial energy that we've seen tackling this. We made our first investment in a company called Work America, which helps folks graduating from community colleges find jobs. And we're closing on our second investment in a firm that's redesigning technology training around the needs of low-income students of color in a way to make that industry much more inclusive. And there'll be much more with that. There'll be much more to come as we continue to build out that work in partnership with Barclays.
That's great, thank you. So Unreasonable Institute has been, I think, at the forefront of supporting innovation and entrepreneurship. And so I'm excited to hear that you guys are also looking at the domestic market and thinking about this particular issue. So I'd love to hear how Unreasonable Group is thinking about it and some of the forays that you've made into solving this huge issue.
Yeah, great question. We support entrepreneurs who are designing solutions to what we would call, this is a small room, so I could say it, what we would call BFPs, which are just big fucking problems. No more accurate expression. And I think one of the biggest ones is the lack of jobs and the growing concern of that. And actually, we were talking just before this. Mark was with his Uber driver, who said, "I just need to make it for 5 more years before self-driving cars take over." Organizations like Uber and Lyft, they're celebrated for the entrepreneurial spirit that they have with those who jump into their cars and drive them, but that's going to get replaced. And so who's going to create the new jobs of tomorrow? We think it's going to be entrepreneurs in specifically the fastest growing sector in this country, which we've identified as the green economy. Green economy to us, it's a broad expression. It's renewables, it's clean tech, it's also environmental efficiencies, which is reimagining how we're going to construct our cities, or reimagining transportation or the future of food systems. And it's in this sector where you have entrepreneurs who have amazing technologies, scalable models that are positioned to do good for the planet profitably, but also create significant jobs that we're playing with Barclays, and very excited about the partnership. And our goal with this partnership is to scale up really the fastest growing companies in the green economy who are creating at least 500 jobs in the next 5 years. And when we set up that statistic, we said, let's find entrepreneurs who can create 500 jobs in 5 years. Initially, I think we were scratching our heads a little bit, saying, is that realistic? And as we've dove into picking the portfolio, I think there's no question that it's realistic. But they're the black swans, right? These are the entrepreneurs who are solving some of our most pressing environmental challenges in this country, but they're also creating jobs at a rate that we really haven't seen before, and they do exist, but they're rare. And so our goal with the partnership with Barclays is identify them and wrap them with the right resources so they can scale much faster. But they're already on that track.
Yeah. Well, I think when you set out to find something that is important but rare, you're also hoping to demonstrate something that's possible, so that what you do now that might feel so singular and unusual becomes really kind of obvious and commonplace at some point in the future.
And hopefully they call it the reasonable group.
Right? Yeah. It's like, this is so obvious. Why wouldn't you want to tap into this talent to create a more sustainable economy?
Yeah.
So we start with innovation. And we start with collaboration. So I want to kind of move over to that topic. And not necessarily just as it pertains to us, because we've obviously we've just started working together on these particular collaborations, so we're in the honeymoon phase, and we're all there's so much love. But what we know about partnerships is that they're really, really tough. Designing them, putting them together, living through them. So we've all had experience with that, and whether from the work we're doing together now or other experiences, I just wanted us to kind of delve into that a little bit and speak a little bit of truth about what's hard about them. So Mark, I'll start with you, because I know you are a troublemaker, and you've probably had a mix of experiences of getting things done and also struggling. So what has been your experience of what has worked in creating these sort of creative collaborations inside Barclays?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we recognize that we can't achieve anything on our own, and partnership is going to be fundamental to success, especially on a challenge as big as the challenge of employability and workforce development. I think if we think about even just our partnership with Unreasonable, how far we've come in the last 12 months, I'd say, since we first got together and agreed to make this work. But it is tough because you have an organization like a Barclays, which you said is 326 years old, with all of our reach, our distribution channels, the access to networks and capacity resources that we can tap into. And you marry that up with an organization like Unreasonable, which is very entrepreneurial from every aspect of what you do is driven by this entrepreneurial concept. So they're going to be pain points. We had probably a 12-month conversation around contracting and brand and naming and all those things which come up when you're talking to big organizations. But at the heart of it, we all had the same objectives in mind. We all had this shared vision, this shared goal for the partnership. And I think that's key. If you're both coming into this with a very clear sense of what you want the end result to look like, and this shared commitment to just making the best possible collaboration work between the two organizations, then you can get through those challenges. Although we only had a name 3 days ago for our partnership, which launches next week.
Took a year, yeah.
It does take time. One of the things I think that I've been hearing and reflecting on when people talk about these multi-sector collaborations is that sometimes people can mistake a sort of simple funding relationship with a partnership. And I think there are going to continue to be a need for transactional relationships between different kinds of organizations. But what we're trying to build, I think more and more, are these real collaborations and partnership, which again makes things more complicated. So in the case of Barclays, I think one of the things that's been a really important part of this is leveraging more than capital at Barclays. And you have an organization that is more millennials than non-millennials, people with a particular skill set, and people who I think are really hungry to bring that into a space with more meaning, more impact. Hearing that terrifies a small organization. When you think about just droves of talented, well-intentioned people that could overwhelm your ability to operate. And so we are in a really exciting moment of trying to figure out how to make that work. And I wanted to just have Eamon talk a little bit about how we've tried to navigate that space of tapping into some of the talent that Barclays is making available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks.
After the initial, fear.
There was definitely a little bit of that. Yeah, I think that there were, I guess I came into the partnership with a little bit of skepticism that we could turn things around. We're looking at investment opportunities that move quickly and need to be able to equip ourselves with the information to make decisions along that timeline. And I was a little worried that we'd be able to, there was no question that the talent was there, that the knowledge was there. The question to me was, can we create a feedback loop that's quick enough to enable us to put it to work? And so far, we're early in our partnership, but I've been really pleasantly surprised by what we've been able to create. We were looking at a couple of opportunities in the financial inclusion space, and part of what Acumen America is looking to invest in is companies that tackle issues of poverty, as I mentioned. In financial services, the proxy that folks use to describe who their customers are is FICO and people's credit score. And so the question was, how do we better understand the relationship between one's credit score and poverty? And it's a big question. And then, how do some of the various credit products that are out there really serve this market that we're interested in? So a couple of big, meaty questions. And so no better way to test the skepticism than to get out there and give it a try. And we had a team staffed up from Barclays, and they came back with a very thoughtful set of analysis for us. And, we had a good conversation. There were some questions that I had, and, what impressed me was not that they just done the work, but that there was actually sort of a rigorous consideration of the questions. My pushback had already been something they debated internally. And, to me, that signals that this isn't just a piece of work or window dressing, but this is a way that it comes from a place of real interest and engagement and passion on behalf of the team there. And I guess the other thing I would say is that it takes a champion to really drive this kind of work. I don't think these things can just happen by accident when, Barclays and Acumen or Barclays and Unreasonable are in the same room. And, Mark's leadership and the leadership and the work of your team, putting their shoulder behind projects like this is the reason that we're able to create this value.
I get the easy role. I just get to sit on stage and talk about it. The teams do all the hard work.
Don't.
But to your point, Eamon, we have 70% of the people in the building I work in New York, thousands of people in the building, are millennials, and they are so energized and so engaged around these types of partnerships. So the hope that we have is that we can find ways to plug them in where they can use their skills, the skills that they apply every day in their day job, to really bring more to this partnership than just our funding and resources.
Yeah. So in that spirit, and before we open it up, because I do feel like I want to make this as much a conversation as possible, and we can then kind of elaborate on some of the things that we're hearing is of interest to this group. But because we're here at SOCAP, and this is such an incredibly diverse and now very robust community of people who share these values around the power of entrepreneurship, the power of using capital in the right ways. But I think more and more I'm hearing this conversation around collaboration, working across sectors, and bringing in different stakeholders, not just the investors and the entrepreneurs, but some corporations, some enablers, people from government, who we all understand play a role. So as we sit here and we think about what it is we're looking for in this community, what are the kinds of partnerships that you are sort of hoping to discover or identify or walk away with from being at SOCAP this year? And you can dream big, a partner that's rainbow colored with a unicorn horn.
Sounds
and
awesome. You need partner with a unicorn, yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely looking for unicorns.
I would maybe quickly comment on that, and the spirit of this partnership with Barclays too, by actually going to the antithesis of it, which is what we would not be looking for. It was about 3 years ago we ran an experiment called Unreasonable at Sea, and we had a ship sailing around the world with all these tech entrepreneurs trying to help them scale internationally faster. And one of them's back there, Pedro. It was a really big experiment, and it was a risky one, and it wasn't well funded, and so it was maxed out on credit cards and all these types of things trying to pull it off. And one of a company that I have a close friend with, I feel like I can mention, was Pepsi, and they had reached out and actually offered to sponsor the whole thing, which was $1.2 million is what we needed. And mind you, we were in debt. And it was the easiest partnership to say no to. When I told my mom about it afterwards, she wanted to kill me because I was borrowing from them too. But it was the easiest, and it's not because we dislike Pepsi, and it's not because we wouldn't work with Pepsi, but it's because there wasn't trajectory alignment. Right? That partnership was one of sponsorship. Mm-hmm. They wanted the exposure associated with it. If Pepsi wanted to work on agricultural systems with Unreasonable, or work on the future of clean drinking water, then it would be fascinating, or supply chain management and how to make it more sustainable, but there wasn't the alignment. And with Barclays, there's so much direct alignment in terms of the trajectory of Barclays and the trajectory of where the entrepreneurs we're working with are going, that to me, that's the type of partnership that you want, which is a true collaboration where there's kind of shared growth, commercial and societal impact baked into it and into the DNA of the collaboration. And so if there were any partnerships that we'd be looking for, it'd be looking to work with institutions, government, multinationals, entrepreneurs who deeply care about solving one of these BFPs, one of these global challenges, with market-driven models. And then we'd say, yeah, let's dance. Reasonable probably has about 400 partnerships in different ways. Because when we care about genuinely solving these types of problems and there's alignment, then it's more fun to be pathologically collaborative. It's the only way we could do it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. How about you guys? You're launching something brand new. It's sort of an entrepreneurial enterprise on its own. So what are you guys looking for?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same themes. I think it has to be mutual. I think a real partnership there's a lot that we can learn from partners like Barclays and other organizations. But I think for it to work, there has to be something that the partner is interested in learning from us. And that could be, what does it take to invest in high growth, high impact, poverty tackling businesses in the US? Or what are those entrepreneurs doing and what's around the corner in these sectors? And I think that's the kind of insight that we're able to tap into in the work that we do. And for partners for whom those are relevant questions, I think that's what creates the gravity between our two organizations. I think from the perspective of Acumen America, the idea of trying to create a laboratory with partners like this is something that's really exciting to me. I mean, small organizations, and if you're in healthcare and trying to sell to health insurance companies or provider networks, those are difficult institutions to crack into. How do you sell to an organization like that? Not an easy question to answer. How do you design a product to meet the need of a process that's behind a wall? So finding partners that can help sort of shine light on some of those opportunities that might otherwise be dark, and something like in the workforce space. I mean, Barclays has 100,000, tens of thousands, over 100,000 employees, and to think about how can we create a laboratory about what does it look like? What do Barclays hiring practices look like, and what role can entrepreneurship play in making those even more inclusive? So, for me, there are activities, particularly at this large enterprise level, that exist behind these walls that entrepreneurs are hungry. These are problems that they're hungry to solve, but data that they have difficulty accessing, and that can be the death of companies. And so, I think being able to build a partnership that shines light on those problems is one that's particularly powerful.
Can I go off of that just a little bit?
This is a conversation.
Good. I completely agree. And as we start to work with high growth entrepreneurs, what we're seeing is what big companies are best in the world at, small, fast-growing companies struggle the most with, which is how do you run something cross-continentally? What are your HR practices? How do you set up the proper governance and manage a truly global operation? But what these small, fast, kind of exploding at the seams companies are best in the world at, large institutions that are 300 plus years of age struggle desperately with, which is how do you disrupt yourselves, right? What are the bleeding edge technologies that are going to take over and reimagine this marketplace? And if you can create an environment in which you can cross-fertilize what both those organizations are strongest at and make it collaborative, in which Barclays and the entrepreneur are learning equally from each other. There is no sponsor relationship. It's a genuine learning relationship because their trajectories go like that. Then there's something really magical, and it's humbling. And we keep talking about Barclays and how excited we are, and it's real. This isn't a pitch at all, because it's so exciting to be at a moment in time when one of the world's largest financial institutions is saying, we need to learn from entrepreneurs, and we're serious about it. And I think that collaboration, that's what's most exciting.
Yeah.
Well, and the program, so just to add to that, as is a conversation, the program that we're running with Daniel and Unreasonable in the US, the space that we're going to bring these entrepreneurs together is a site about 2 hours outside of New York City. And we, as we were talking about how we can engage colleagues from Barclays and bring that energy back into the business, we started to think about which senior leaders we would love to get out to the program and to spend time mentoring entrepreneurs, learning from the entrepreneurs, and playing a role in the program. And some of the most senior people in Barclays who you have to book into their schedule 6 months ahead to get anywhere near them have given us 3-4 days to come and spend staying at the site, and we thought we wouldn't get them to come out for a half an hour. They're literally going to spend 3 days living on the space with these entrepreneurs. They're so excited to be part of this program and learn from the entrepreneurs that are there.
It's going to be a sleepover.
Yeah, I love it.
All the executives.
Can we have like little s'mores and campfires and stuff? So one thing that I've heard, because there is this excitement as you see corporations starting to really pay attention to all the dynamic creativity, innovation, and also around this whole concept of sustainable and inclusive business. You've got entrepreneurs who their entire business model, top to bottom, is built around those principles. And so I think corporations see that as almost like maybe a healthy virus that could come and influence how they tackle the issues. And then at the same time, a lot of entrepreneurs see corporate partnerships as a path to scale. But there's definitely a disconnect. And I think in some cases, the worst thing that can happen to a social enterprise is when it can enter into a partnership with a corporate who, if it's not managed correctly, can basically chew them up and spit them out. And they can spend years of limited resources, money, and time for something that doesn't ultimately yield results. I'm biased because I do this work, but I think that there's a really powerful role for intermediaries. And being here at SOCAP, I think that there's a lot of investors who have now built portfolios and networks of great social enterprises that could be doing much more to drive that collaboration and design it in a way that really enhances the entrepreneur and protects the entrepreneur. Because no offense, but it can often go awry, and those resources can be overwhelming.
That's why we have the best partners on the platform with us, learning from your
Well,
15 years.
You figured that out. But I think it's a particularly important role for impact investors to play. As I've heard entrepreneurs at this conference say, where do we begin? I say, you go talk to your investors and tell them that's part of their job, to bring you the capital and the networks and the relationships that can help you. So hopefully we'll see more corporates brought here by those investors. So I want to open it up to all of you. It's been exciting to see the audience fill out. You guys got your coffee and now you're here. So I want to hear from you. What are the questions you have? And I'm not going to say the usual no comments allowed, because I actually want to hear your comments. What are your reflections on issues around workforce development and collaboration? Yeah. And if you can just say your name and where you're from.
Replacing humans for manufacturing, as well as the austerity in governments that's taking place, and the defunding of jobs. And you put that in contrast to incredible efforts like what you're doing, which, if they're in this partnership, if it's wildly successful over the next 5 years, it might create 1 million jobs, which would be unbelievable, but yet not even scratch the surface. So my point is that the role of policy and the role of government is essential if we're going to solve these problems, yet government, both at the national and at the global level, seems more inept than ever at taking on big challenges. So I'm curious to, one, challenge you to, what can we do about that? How can we take the entrepreneurial energy that we see in these partnerships and the power of 326-year-old massive corporations and influence that positively? And then the second question is, if you were the government and say for a day you could make any law you want, what would you do to really tackle this challenge at the scale that it exists?
Great. So I'd love to hear, Mark, your thoughts on this role of policy, because I'm sure as an institution you have a perspective there and you have a capacity to have influence there. How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And we actually had this conversation over dinner the other night around one of the ways that Barclays can also be helpful is bringing our own relationships to the partnership and bringing other stakeholders to the table, to the discussion. Engaging them in our programs and exposing them to some of the work we're doing. In New York, we have a number of different partnerships that draw on some of the government initiatives around technology talent. There's an initiative called the Tech Talent Pipeline that's funding technology training programs that we're looking at how we can play a role in that, in scaling up some of the successes there. So I think there is things starting to happen at the grassroots level that we can perhaps bring our focus to and help to scale. But I agree, it's not something we can solve alone.
Yeah, and then I guess for both of you, if you could be president, but if you actually could say these are the policies that have the biggest bearing, maybe not on solving all of the social erosion challenges, but that really make it harder, I think, for entrepreneurs to succeed or to make headway in this space.
Go first.
Tough question.
The Aim and Anderson Act of 2016.
Sounds good.
They got a ring to it. I think that part of our strategy, to think about how do we work with the sort of the public infrastructure that exists out there today. And so when we think about building, the future of work, how do we build a workforce ecosystem that's looking into the future about what our workforce needs are going to be? Maybe it's not, maybe HVAC is not going to be the same as it was in the past, and it's going to be, drone pilots or something. And we need to make sure we have an educational infrastructure, which already exists today, that's sort of nimble and looking forward. And so I think for us to build a strategy that doesn't take advantage of the 1,600 community colleges that are already out there and largely publicly funded, I think is missing the plot. And so part of our work is figuring out how do we enhance, accelerate, buttress the work that's taking place within the public sphere already. And then I think it's also about, how do we democratize? One of the things that I think a lot about is how do we, the pain of that reality of a shifting nature of work is going to affect those for whom opportunity is most restricted. And how do we create a system where those that can survive that transformation are not just those that of privilege and those of wealth, but those that are most capable. So I think there's a couple of pieces of work. How do we, plan for across our society for folks to be meaningfully, purposefully employed, and how do we make sure that happens in a way that's democratized? And so I think about this technology training investment that we're closing on now, and how that's helping to break down barriers of financing and of curriculum that keep folks out of a sector that's has hundreds of thousands of open jobs today. So the Eamon Anderson Act of 2016 is thin on details, unfortunately, but I think you're asking the right question.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. A friend who I love his perspective on the future of jobs. His name is Vivek Wadhwa. Lives here in the Bay Area, and he said that the future factory will have 2 sentient beings in it. It'll be a guy and his dog. And the guy's job is going to be to make certain that the machines are still running, and the dog's job is just to make certain that the guy's job is to feed the dog, and the dog's job is to make certain that he doesn't touch anything. And so walking into a world in which automation is very real. If this partnership's successful, you're right, we could probably help scale up entrepreneurs that create 1 million jobs. That'd be a big win, but it'd be a drop in the bucket. And so how do we go much bigger? And I think there's 2 ways to go much bigger. One is to start to become an R&D engine into the rest of the world. And to be honest about patterns that we see that work and don't work around scaling up entrepreneurs as job creators. And 2 is through policy. This is something that we've really failed at to date with Unreasonable. We've always been private sector oriented, I would say, like aggressively, and have missed the target. And I think the key to really working with policymakers and with government is getting deeply relational. Right? I mean, you started your partnership with Mark, in essence, with a drink in Kenya, right? I don't know how many times, and we don't drink that much, but I don't know how many times we've been in a pub together to make this partnership a reality. And I think that it's with deep relationships, when it's no longer us and them, that we'll really see shifts at a political level. And so in this partnership, we're going to be bringing in policymakers and government officials and people who control those budgets to spend time and spend multiple days and nights with these entrepreneurs and hopefully forge the type of relationship that can lead to catalytic change at that level. But I think without it, we failed. I think you're completely right.
Yeah, and I would just second that. I think it's, I used to tell myself if I really believed that policy was the answer, I wouldn't be working in social enterprise. And I think now, if you really believe in social enterprise, you have to think about the policy dimension. And I think that's a change that's happening now. And we're all sort of playing catch up, saying we are not all the people who need to have this conversation are not in the room in a lot of ways.
And both sides see it, though. To get back to trajectory alignment, government officials are terrified about the future of jobs in this country. And if we can bring a part of that solution, which is entrepreneurs as job creators, and help them find ways to grease the skids so these companies can grow faster and create more jobs, that's the win-win trajectory alignment that I think is very real.
Great.
The other aspect to think about as an R&D engine for Barclays, this partnership, how the learning that we're going to be capturing through partnering with Acumen and Unreasonable can start to then influence the rest of our business and the core business, which is where really the opportunity lies. If we can think about deepening our learning of every aspect of that entrepreneurial journey, from the idea to the IPO, how we can then bring our business to bear and start to really think about impact through core business.
Great. And you had a question.
Good morning. My name is Ira Sokowitz. I'm with a company called Learning Game Studios. I want to build on some of the last comments and then ask a question furthering that. I'm a former government official at the city, state, and federal levels, including the Employment and Training Administration. So I applaud your efforts to be inclusionary, but in the spirit of the discussion of collaboration, I think you need to, and you may already be, so forgive me if you are, broaden your stakeholder set to include the vast breadth of people who affect policy. So for example, it's not only the elected officials, but it's the chambers of commerce. It's the employer base. It's the CBOs who are doing work, the jobs for the future type folks who can give the breadth of perspective to policymakers, but also help understand where the funding streams are, where they're going, how they're working, and how they're failing in order to make those amendments. And I hope at your upcoming conclave you have that kind of breadth of perspective. But to build on some of what you were talking about on the workforce ecosystem and the number of people in poverty, my question to you is, how are you addressing the lowest level of that, which are the people who, even if they've gone through a formal educational system, generally don't have the prerequisites either for additional education, to get the workforce training they need and can sustain, or to find the jobs that pay a living wage. We hear a lot about tech jobs and coding and the like, but in addition to 43 million people in poverty, in the US alone in the adult working population, there are 25 million limited English proficient people. There are 36 million people who lack basic literacy skills and 70 million who lack basic numeracy skills, according to the OECD. So how can the efforts at eradicating poverty, banking the unbanked, but more importantly, finding work for people to sustain their families, really work at the lowest levels where people need foundational skills in order to be able to get the training to get the types of jobs about which you've been speaking so far?
I'd be curious, I know we did a lot of analysis, sort of the demographics. Part of it is, as smaller organizations, there's a bit of desire to focus and be strategic, but what have we seen in terms of where are those opportunities to go deeper?
Yeah, I think that's the right question. I think, how do we build, when we're talking about workforce development, how do we start from talking about those who need it the most? And how do we address some of the barriers that are keeping those folks out of the workforce? And I think often what keeps people, part of it is language barriers, geographic barriers, skill barriers. Some of those require tackling systems that are much bigger than our vocational training infrastructure that exists today. And we think very much about the intersection of the portfolios that we invest in: health, workforce development, and financial inclusion. Our first investment in the healthcare space is in a company called Healthify that the vision is to take funding that exists for the healthcare needs of Medicaid patients and to channel that towards the social determinants of health, help getting folks off the streets and into beds, help getting folks in job training programs or the daycare that they need, and that these are the determinants of your health, although they exist outside of the clinic. And I think that those are also the kinds of interventions and those are the kinds of barriers that we need to think about eliminating, the same reasons that folks are staying out of community college. And so, we're reactive to the ideas that entrepreneurs are building, and I think that that's the problem statement that we're very excited to explore. And I take your point about how do we engage the large tent of policy makers and shapers. If we're really going to move the needle, investing in an entrepreneur is a part of it. How do we shine light on what they're learning? How do we put that entrepreneur and those lessons on a platform and get the right people in a room? And I don't think we've been as good at that as we ought to be.
Some of the most successful partnerships we had start with this kind of demand-led model. So looking at, in job training programs in technology, where the employer demand is coming from now and where it's shifting to. So you spoke about web development and coding, and we see a real, in New York, we see a real opportunity around cybersecurity and some of those fastest growing sectors. And if you can bring those those very specific technology skills to people wrapped around a broader model of softer skills and align that with very direct on-the-job training experience. And we've had success, I think over 85% of people going through our partnership with Pascolas in New York City get jobs. And it's a really interesting model when you can wrap together those different aspects of a demand-led model with specific training in areas where there's fast-growing employment demand and on-the-job experience. Some real success.
Great. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, I think he's going to bring you a mic.
Here I come.
Hi, my name is Caroline with Haven Connect, and I was curious to learn a little bit more about the operational specifics of the collaboration because, I get the vision like entrepreneurs and making things, making jobs and workforce development, but like, what does that mean? And like specifically, how are you, like what programs are you doing? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Do you want to go
to
first?
the Barclays partnership.
Yeah, great. So we're launching programs. I'll describe what those are across 3 targeted geographies, 3 continents. So one of the programs is focused on the Americas, the other one on the UK, and the other one on the small region of the world known as Asia. So half the world's population. And across these 3 regions, we'll be running annual accelerators for a hand-picked portfolio of the fastest growing and high growth entrepreneurs we could find that have sustainable products or services and that are positioned to create at least 500 jobs. In these programs, they're 2 weeks long and they're fully immersive. So we'll bring together about a dozen CEOs of these very fast growing businesses and we'll match them with about 20 mentors. We'll be bringing in policymakers and government officials who are relevant to what their businesses are trying to do and also look to bring in the right types of strategic funders. All towards one aim, which is how do we help grow what is working faster and create at least 500 jobs in 5 years with each of the entrepreneurs. And the partnership up front, it's a 3-year partnership from day one, so we have an incredible chance. That's a very significant pilot in a lot of ways, and we're going to learn a lot along that route and hope to make it much larger. So over the next 3 years, we'll work with over 100 of these very fast-growing companies in the green economy around the world that are creating jobs.
And for Acumen, what the specifics of the partnership have looked like in its early days, so we're just getting started with Barclays. We'll come across an investment opportunity and have some questions, and we will reach out to the team at Barclays and say, these are our questions. And they staff up a team surprisingly quickly who puts together a set of analysis that's surprisingly in-depth, and we set up a call to explore what they've learned. And so we basically created this hotline, so when we're capacity constrained and looking at one more deal, then we've got the ability to diligence or have an extra question that is wide in scope. We've got the ability to tap into to Barclays through their employee engagement work to find the right set of Barclays team members who can help us track down the answer. So that's sort of one piece that's really enables us to expand our capacity both in our due diligence of investment opportunities and also sort of the more blue sky thinking. We'll explore what's the role of what role should the gig economy play in Acumen's workforce development portfolio, and so sort of bigger, higher level questions that sometimes don't always find their way to the top of the to-do list. And then the second thing that we've looked at in terms of the specifics of the program is how do we're often investing in first-time entrepreneurs and who are multiplying the size of their business. And these are leaders to begin with, and that's what we're investing in. But that's a significant stretch in what their leadership needs to look like. And how do we tap into, not just the large number of millennial workforce at Barclays, but also the folks that have been building businesses within a business for decades and sharing their experience. So we're also participating in something they call a brain trust, where Entrepreneurial will spend a morning with 5 or 6 senior leaders at Barclays to really workshop a strategic question. And sort of, similarly, the entrepreneur is, day to day in the tactical execution, and rarely, do they have the sort of, the space to think about what would it mean to take a big risk for my business. and to have a safe space and people that have done that and succeeded and done that and failed to help them explore and workshop those kinds of questions is something that we're really excited about as well. That's where we're starting, and I think there's room to grow.
And just one little plug I want to make, because we've become pretty convinced at Acumen that one of the ways we can help our companies is to help them understand these partnership opportunities, and we've been learning the hard way and also tracking what others are doing. So where Mark and I first met was at a collaboration summit that we host in Nairobi every year. Last year we published a report where we tried to kind of almost catalog the models of partnership that we're seeing, specifically between large corporates and social enterprises. We just, to make life simple, we're like, let's call it 4 categories. Skills partnerships, we've just talked about venture partnerships. So you've got corporations co-creating new businesses with entrepreneurs. Channel partnerships that are about sourcing and distribution of products, and knowledge partnerships that are working together on R&D, research, piloting new businesses. So within that, we have been looking for and hunting down stories and examples wherever we can, and we have a new report coming out in 2 weeks that will be a follow-on to that original report. And I encourage any of you to sort of track it down or give me your card. But I think that the idea of partnership is so exciting, and when you hear the success stories, there is a lot of hand-waving, like, yay, we all came together. People don't necessarily talk as openly about what it took to build it, the parameters, the requirements, the constraints, the amount of funding involved. But we're trying to elucidate those stories so people can actually learn from them and hopefully replicate them. Cool. Any questions? Yeah. Oh, he's coming down with a mic.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. Understanding that this incredible, the incredible potential of cross-sector collaboration is so needed, how do you in a collaboration summit bring together these unreasonable partners? It's so operationally hard. I run a cross-sector event, and we just did that in Brazil, and it's really operationally difficult because it gets so broad. So how do you find those target markets and then be that convener? I'm just curious in all of your work that you're doing. Any insights?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I used to try is to make people pay to come. Or at least to sort of have some skin in the game and say, we want you to build this with us. And that's challenging as well, because you're with a smaller group, but the people who come really have skin in the game. And we're now trying to really broaden it and focus on the diversity of the group. So we'll probably end up with what you're talking about of like a lot of different stakeholders and how do you align them. So I would say we don't have a blueprint, but we've been experimenting and trying to figure out what's the right balance in terms of how narrow do you go, how carefully do you structure the conversation. But at a minimum, we've learned that looking at a sector and a geography can be really helpful to at least get the right people in the room. And also to be really explicit that we're talking about collaboration, not talking about an issue, because you can talk about an issue from so many angles, but to really say, we're here to talk about collaboration. So if you are in this room, you are ready to collaborate. You are an entrepreneur that has decided you want to work with a corporate, or you're a corporate who's decided you want to work with an entrepreneur, because we can't convince anyone. I think that's the work that has to happen before you go in the room. But yeah, and I think it's, at these convenings and these efforts to bring people together, you have probably more failure than success, but you have to be clear about what the successes are and track those. What have you guys had as experiences with those?
Yeah. I always like to make fun of us and myself at Unreasonable. And I actually believe teachers are the bedrock of our society. So before I say this, make that clear. But I like to say that those who can't do teach, and those who can't do or teach run accelerators. Because we need to be master conveners, to get to your point. And for us, it's first about getting the right people. Because there's so many people out there that you could pick from. And so how we do that is we talk to our entrepreneurs. And we say, if you could have any 3 people who would be on your board, who would be the most strategic, actual individuals on the whole planet, who would those 3 people be as board directors and why? We say, great, let's go try to get those 3 people. If you could have any 3 funders who would help you have a quantum leap in productivity within your business, who are those funders? What are the teams at that organization? So on. And then we go after those very precise people. And when it's precise, people are much more receptive because you reach out to them, you say, look, this company, an example, we're working with a company called General Fusion. They're probably, at least in this country, that we found the best positioned company to figure out fusion, which was, in essence, recreating the sun. So it's ubiquitous free energy if you can make it. Clean free energy if you can make it.
And not accidentally blow up the planet.
And not accidentally blow up the planet. And what they're trying to do is create the next Manhattan project, but around fusion instead of fission. And that's an incredibly difficult challenge. This company's raised about $150 million. They're doing well on some of those marks, but they're really challenged on the marketing side. And so we said, if you could have anybody, who would it be? And they said, Seth Godin. And so we reached out to Seth, and Mark actually doesn't know this yet, but Seth's going to be coming out to the partnership, to the program. But because it's so precise, when we reach out to Seth, we say, look at this company, look at what they're creating, and they're saying they need you out of anybody on the planet to show up, then he's much more excited about that invitation because his time's so valuable. And we do that with kind of everybody we're bringing into the program. It's just really precise.
Any other burning questions? So I think what we'll do before we wrap up is just ask for any kind of last comments. And again, I think, I would ask to share something that's been maybe tougher, a disappointment as a starting point, and then on a lighter note, kind of what gives you hope around this potential for collaboration. But I do think that, it's easy to gloss over the pain points, and I always say to people, go in with your eyes open, get ready to call on your inner resilience to do this kind of partnerships work, because I think it prepares you better. So what was a moment that kind of forced you to have that kind of resilience? No need to name names.
Mark. No.
It was Mark.
I think that to be realistic about these types of partnerships, at least this partnership in particular, Mark, you had mentioned a year, but really we've been talking for probably 4 years, right? Yep. Trying to find ways to collaborate where there was real trajectory alignment. It took 4 years. It was a very long period of time. I think as entrepreneurs, we always overestimate what's achievable in a year and underestimate what's achievable in a decade, if you want to use those time scales. And I think with really large strategic partnerships, it's hard in terms of how long it takes. And for an entrepreneur, that's critical because cash flow kills most businesses. Yeah. And so walking into bigger strategic partnerships, I think it's just important to acknowledge that it might take 2 years or 3 years, even if it feels like it's 6 months away, and plan as if it's going to take 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think how to survive that incubation period to get to the value that these kinds of partnerships can provide. And then I think also how to sort of figure out how to talk through different levels of risk management and risk tolerance as organizations. Those are the things that are frustrating. We sort of live in two different worlds of the ability to break things or not, and that can be a rub. I think the hopefulness comes from a couple of things. I mean, one, I see the way the entrepreneurs that we're investing in look at their strategic investors that are investing directly, and I see this happening successfully. A health plan that invests in Healthify and helping them execute on sales and helping them understand how to build a market-appropriate sales force. And I see it working, sort of at the next level. And I also hear from the entrepreneurs that we're working with a real excitement about the potential that this partnership brings. And I think, beyond expanding the capacity that Acumen America itself has to this partnership, what gets me hopeful and excited is talking to entrepreneurs and, seeing, their eyes get big when they start to imagine what the possibilities look like.
Yeah, for me, I think both of our partnerships started in similar ways, and then it wasn't, we didn't come together to launch these partnerships. We've been working together for a few years. And it's often more important just to get going on something and find a way to work together, which may not be, your initial vision for a long-term partnership, but once you get in there and start to build those relationships, then you can take it forward from there. And that works whether you're looking at driving, entrepreneurial endeavors and innovations within a big company like a Barclays, or whether that's a new partnership outside the organization. Yeah. And often getting going is just the hardest thing. In terms of what the hopefulness I have for these partnerships. It's such an opportunity we have, given that we now have a 3-year, we were talking about this yesterday, this 3-year runway to deliver this partnership. We can do this the first year, we can learn, we can fail miserably, hopefully not, learn from our mistakes, and build on that for the next 2 or 3 years. So we really have an opportunity now to iterate this partnership in the next few years, and with both Acumen and Unreasonable, deliver something that's really going to have real impact.
Great. Well, I want to thank the panelists and also thank all of you for being here, for sharing your own reflections, and I'm sure we're happy to continue the conversation. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Yasmina.
Thanks, Yasmina.